your land. When they exited Egypt, the whole intention was for them to enter into the promise. It was not for them to dilly-dally in the journey. It was not for them to get lost in the journey. It was not for them to doubt God in the journey, but it was for them eventually to land and arrive into their promise. And today, God says we ought to land in our promise, and we ought not to be distracted by the issues of life, by the circumstances, the obstacles, the challenges that we see and face on our daily lives, but we have to enter into the promise. It is in Numbers chapter 12 where we see the 12 spies coming back from Canaan, from the promise, from spying the promise, from assessing the promise that God has given them. They are blessing. God said, go and spy, go and assess it. This is Moses, and give us evidence, bring back evidence that the promise does exist. Bring back evidence that what we are believing God for, it is alive and well. We are not just crazy. We are not just moving, and what we are moving towards does not exist. But he said, Moses requested them that they bring back evidence with them. When they got back, the 12, 10 out of them, in fact, all of them, all the 12 spies, when they came back, they brought grapes. They all brought grapes. They all brought evidence that the promise is alive. They all brought evidence that the blessing exists. And I say to you today that there is evidence that your blessing is alive. There is evidence out there that what you are believing God for, it is not you being crazy. It is not you being beside yourself, but it does exist. Your blessing does exist. Our promise does exist. We are not just believing God, but there is evidence. When they got back from Canaan, there was evidence of milk. There was evidence of honey. There was evidence of grapes. The land was a fruitful land. The land was a place to be. What God promised them, it was exactly and far beyond what they expected. They saw grapes that they have never seen before. They saw that their blessing is producing the kind of food that they have never seen before. But be that as it may, they all saw the evidence. They all brought the evidence back from Canaan. But it is amazing and surprising that the 10 out of the 12 chose to believe otherwise. They chose to believe their insufficiencies, inadequacies. They chose to believe their shortfalls as opposed to the evidence that they had before them. There was evidence. God promised them the land, and they saw the promise. They saw the evidence that the promise is alive. They saw the evidence that God is not a man that he should lie. But they chose to believe their fears. They chose to be counted out of the blessing due to their fears that has erupted in their spirit. They were afraid because they saw the inhabitants of Canaan, that they were 10 times, 20 times bigger than they were. Then they chose to say, there is no way we can go and take the blessing because the inhabitants of that land, they are giants. They called them giants. I don't know if the Canaanites, they knew or they ever addressed themselves as giants until these 10 men started admiring them so much. These 10 men admired the enemy. They admired the one who was occupying their blessing. And I say today, we will never become greater than the enemy. We will never become more than what we're supposed to be as long as we are paying admiration to the enemy. As long as you admire the enemy, you are praising the enemy, there's no way you can become greater and better than what you are praising. They were praising the enemy. They were admiring the enemy of their strength, and not realizing that the giant that they were seeing in the enemy, it was what they were supposed to become. I say to you today, you are looking at the giant, you are standing in your promise and looking at the giants that are occupying your blessing, and you are crying and complaining to God, saying, Lord, why have you deprived me of this strength? If I was as strong as they are, I would have taken and invaded their land. But they did not realize that they are not going to fight these enemies out of their own physical strength, but they are going to use God's strength. They are moving under God's unctioning. They are moving under God's anointing. So it will be God's doing that they will overtake the land and run out the inhabitants of that land, of the promise. And remember, the same enemy that you are admiring and saying they are giants, they are only giants because of the food that they are eating. They are not eating the same menu that the children of Israel were eating in the wilderness. In the wilderness, the children of Israel were eating survival menu, not menu to become. They were eating the food for survival. The food that was dished out to them, it was for them to survive the harsh realities of the wilderness. It was not the food that was going to feed them, nourish them so that they will become what they are not and become what God has originally intended for them to be. Now I say today, as I let you go, you need to let the enemy know that you will not back down, you will not give up, and you will not go back, simply because the same enemy that you are admiring as a giant is holding your food, is holding your menu. If you can step into the promised land, you will possess and overtake the food that the enemy is eating, the food that the giant is eating. And I say to you, as soon as your menu changes, once your menu changes, your size will change, your stature will change.